Parshas Bamidbar, but we are going to speak on the topic of Rus. Okay, so the question I'd like to address this week is, why do we read Megillas Rus on Shovuos? And what fundamental lessons can we draw from the different reasons that will enhance not only our whole Yom Tov, but potentially our Yiddishkeit as well? And before we get going, I just want to say that the shir has been sponsored in Nishmas and Mordechai David ben Rav Yosef alav Hashalom, whose yahrzeit was Chof Ches Iyar. So there are many reasons given why Rus is leined on Shovuos, because if you think about it, a Megillah that's leined on the Yom Tov has to have some sort of connection to the day it's leined on. We don't just do things willy-nilly in Yiddishkeit, right? We have to have a reason for it. So I'm going to just very briefly mention 6 that are brought down in different Sfarim, and then as I say, I want to focus on only 3. So number 1 that's brought down is that Torah, the reason why we lein Megillas Rus on Shovuos is to teach us the concept that Torah is acquired with Yisurim, with suffering, with difficulty. And we'll expound on that one soon. Number 2 is the reason why Rus is read on Shovuos is to teach us that Torah is all about Chesed. And we're going to expound on that one as well. The third one that's brought down by lots of people is that Shovuos is the yahrzeit of David HaMelech. It's the day of his birth and the day of his yahrzeit. And we know that Rus was the grandmother of David HaMelech. So we lein Rus as a recognition of it being David HaMelech's yahrzeit. That's one reason given. Another reason given is that the theme of Rus centers around Rus's journey to Gerus. And if you think about it, Rus becoming a Geyores is similar to us being Kabolas Hatorah. So you have a theme that connects them both. Number 5, and this is an interesting one, again we'll expound on this one with Hashem, is that through leining the Megillah of Rus, one will be mechazik in bitochen generally, but in specifically as regards to the coming of Mashiach. Again, we'll explain that one, break it down. And the final one that I'm going to quote today is the reason why we lay Rus on Shovuos is to show the importance of Torah Shebaal Peh. As we know that for Rus to be accepted into Klal Yisrael, it required a drosha. Moyavi v'lo moyavis. In other words, only people who are moyavim were excluded from Klal Yisrael, but being that she was a moyavis, she was not excluded, and therefore she was allowed into Klal Yisrael. So because the whole basis of Rus being accepted into Klal Yisrael came about because of Torah Shebaal Peh, it is therefore appropriate that on Shovuos, when we makabel the Torah, we make a recognition of this story of Rus, which centers around an aspect of Torah Shebaal Peh. Okay? That's the summarized version. You can all go home now. I want to focus on 3 of the reasons we mentioned, and we'll start with the first one. Torah nikna b'yisurim. Torah is acquired with suffering. So before we explain it, we'll just bring the source of this. The Eli Rabbah brings this reason down in Halacha, but it's also explicitly a Yalkut Shimoni. The Yalkut Shimoni Remez Tov Kuf Tzadi Vav says, what is Rus doing on Shovuos? Why are we leining Rus on Shovuos? Lelamedcha shelo nitna Torah elo alidei yisurim va'oni, to teach us that Torah was only given through suffering and poverty. So what the Yalkut Shimoni is doing is there is a connection to Rus's personal journey of through obstacles and suffering and poverty, and there's a connection between that and our journey of Kabolas Hatorah. By the way, seeing that we're about to speak about Rus in terms of Hagerus, there is a machlokas, and I just want you to be aware of it. There's a machlokas in Mefarshim when exactly Rus became Jewish. Because there are those that want to say, and there's quite a few reputable Sfarim that do this b'shem the Zohar, where they say that Rus actually became a Geyores at the beginning of the story, before she married Machloin. And likewise, I suppose, I don't know exactly, but I suppose they say the same thing about Orpah, I'm not sure. But they definitely say it about Rus. Before she married Machloin, she became a Geyores. And it's Al Pi Zohar. The problem with it is it doesn't work with the whole story, as we know it from the Pashas Apsukim. It doesn't work with the Gemara Nivomas that details the conversations that took place between Naomi and Rus when she was convincing her not to become Jewish. The whole thing chronologically is a bit shver, and there are Mefarshim that try and make of it what they do. But we're going with the Pashtas, which is what other Mefarshim take on, that. And you can explain it how you wish. There's a whole Rogatchover actually I just saw before I came that explains how Rus became a Geyores later, but it was Chal Mafreya, so therefore it was as if she was a Geyores before. Explain it how you want. The fact is, the Pashtas, the chronological order of events, was that she was not a Geyores when she married Machloin, And therefore, for all intents and purposes, the story of Rus is essentially the story of her becoming a Geira. So let's just picture the scene for a moment, just to bear in mind the journey that Rus is on. Rus marries into a wealthy family. It's quite clear, the beginning of this whole story, the Melech is a very wealthy family, and all looks fine and rosy. Within a very short space of time, her father-in-law dies, her husband dies, her brother-in-law dies, and they all lose their money. What a miserable life. Something that started out as a fairy tale is now a nightmare. It's an awful life. So the Psukim tell us, Perik Aleph, that Naomi decides she wants to move back to Eretz Yehuda. And the Pasuk tells us, Ki shoma b'stei moyav ki fakad Hashem es amay lo tzlem lachem. The famine that they had originally run away from was no more. So Naomi prepared to go back. This was her journey. There's food now, we can go back to Eretz Yehuda. And the Malbim adds, they were leaving their current location, perhaps with an idea of changing their mazel. It'd been a pretty bad couple of months, so maybe if they move to a new location, it'll be a different mazel. Okay, add that in as you wish, but the Psukim detail, they wanted to head back to Eretz Yehuda because that was a place where there was food once again. So as they're traveling, Naomi turns to her daughters-in-law and say, listen, you got nothing here with me anymore. You know, you were married to my sons. Unfortunately, they're no longer. Go back home. And she doesn't do that cold-heartedly. She does it with a lot of warmth, and she gives them brachas. And she says in her words to them, I recognize, because she says Hashem should give you like your own good deeds to me. In other words, she recognizes the chesed that they provided for her in their support of her and in helping her out till this point. She doesn't, make light of that. But at the same time, she says, listen, I've got nothing for you, go home. And their response, Rus and Orpah, their response is, Vatishak lohen, vatis'eno koilon vativkeno. They kiss her, they raise their voice and they cry. Why are they crying? They say to Naomi, we want to stay with you. We want to come back le'amech, to your people. And if you read the Psukim Kipshutai, this seems to be the moment, as I say, chronologically, when the Rus and Orpah, at this point, decided they want to become Jewish. They want to join the Jewish people. They say to Naomi, we want to stay with you. We want to stay in your, go back with you to your people. Well, as is the halacha, Naomi tries to push them off. When someone expresses a desire to become Jewish, we try and dissuade them. She explains, she's old, is she really going to have any more children? It's not really feasible for them to hang around. There's going to be no one for them. Come on, life's so difficult. Anyway, just go back home. She tries to push them off. And the Pasuk continues. They're still crying. Vatishak Orpah lachamoisa. Orpah kisses her mother-in-law goodbye, because at this point Orpah moves off. Rus dovkabah, and Rus holds on tight. So they're busy crying because they've got a deep, heartfelt desire to actually go through with this. But Orpah peters off. And the Medrash tells us that Orpah that night did all sorts of averos, not repeatable on the family share. And this was the few hours after she'd expressed such heartfelt desire to want to go with the Geirus, that she wanted to go with Naomi. And yet Orpah goes off. What about Rus? These three words are perhaps the most favourite words of mine in the story of Rus. I get the shivers when I say them. I love them so much. For Rus dov kaba, Rus held on tight to Naomi, to this whole Geirus ambition. Why was she, and how, more like, was she so determined to see this through? She's being faced with obstacles. She's not in the ideal environment. She's having a terrible life, really, if you put it down on paper. So what is it that she's pursuing? Why is she pursuing it? And there's an interesting shlo, which, if I understand correctly, and I'll read out to you the words. The shlo says, what's hidden in these words of Rus dov kaba. He says, Dveiko yoira al dveiko sa'adam nafshoi benefesh chaveroi be'inyan sheyesh b'hem devak shleimo la'avo. Dveikos, the word dveikos is a very unique word in the Hebrew language. It doesn't just mean closeness. It means a closeness that is soul-level closeness. What Rus felt in connection to Naomi, she felt a deep, heartfelt, soul-level love for Naomi. And says the Shah, that's what it means. Rus dov kaba. Rus was so connected, Rus was so taken in by Naomi. And I'd like to add, this isn't a personal thing. She's likes Naomi, so let's just copy Naomi. She's not a teenager, right? She's connecting to Naomi on a fundamental level. In other words, she can see that Naomi has something that she wants. And by recognizing with such clarity, there's something that Naomi is living by. There's a Yiddishkeit that Naomi has, that Ruth is connecting to on a soul level. She really wants. She wants to stick it through. She wants to stay strong. And we know as the Psukim continue, etc., the conversation, the Gemara Yevamos tells us, the conversation that Naomi then went and had with Ruth. As Ruth said, as Naomi says, oh, come on, you don't really want to, because look at all these mitzvahs. And Ruth says, no, I still want to. And they went back and forth until Naomi was convinced that she was sincere. Ruth committed herself to this journey of Gerus without any expectations for how it was going to turn out. Obviously, she had no idea at this point that there was a fairy tale ending all the way at the end in history, that she would end up being the mother of David HaMelech and Mashiach, which is a gewaldige ending to such a story. She had no idea. But she did see a value, and she saw a clear-minded purpose in becoming Jewish. And she connected to that. And that seems to have provided her with the strength of Verus Dov Kabo. This isn't just a description of her holding on to something that was dear. This is providing the whole context for how she was able to get through the difficulties of her circumstances. She was clear-minded and purpose-driven. She understood the tachlis and the purpose and the te'eles of becoming Jewish, and she was determined to see that through in spite of her circumstances. Is it any surprise that the Yalkut Shimoni tells us, Lelamedcho, the story of Ruth is to teach us, We'll get to the second point in a second, but at least for the first point I want to bring out here is that when a person finds themselves in Yisurim Va'ini, you look to Rus and you get guidance and you get clarity of how to find a way through. Because what Rus did was she became clear on what she wanted. She became clear on the purpose, on the mission, on the meaning of the moment, and that's what pulled her through. And the fact is, you want to compare it to Klal Yisrael in Har Sinai, we had a similar circumstance. When we were offered the Torah, what happened? When the nations of the world were offered the Torah, each one found the problem. That was their focus. I can't keep the Torah because. When the Torah was offered to Klal Yisrael, what was their reaction? What was our reaction? Na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do. And then afterwards we'll find out all the detail. Sounds a little bit foolish to take something on board without knowing the detail. Maybe you're being asked to sign your life away for all sorts of things. But the pshat is that Klal Yisrael had a clarity. At that point in our history, we had just been through all sorts of nisim. We were familiar with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We knew HaKadosh Baruch Hu's outstretched arm. We knew HaKadosh Baruch Hu's extent of love for us. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidoi va'atzmai is asking us, hey guys, do you want this opportunity to come close to us? What do you think our reaction is going to be? Of course. But you don't yet know Hilchos Tchum Shabbos. So what? Whatever it takes. The clarity of purpose, the appreciation in the moment of what Yiddishkeit could offer us as a Yidden, as a Klal Yisrael, is what enabled us to see past difficulty, past any limitations, past any potential problems. We're not even thinking like that. We're just thinking about what we want from this. The clarity of mission, which I think mirrors Ruth's story herself. But there's a second point here which is really crucial. Perhaps it's a more obvious point. But the point is growth, especially spiritual growth, takes effort. And if you want an example of the truth of this, look at the difference between Rus and Orpah. You know, when we're a child, we might be learning the story of Rus, and we all know how great Rus was in her choice to pursue Naomi and Klal Yisrael and Yiddishkeit. Orpah. But you should know something, Orpah also cried. Orpah also had a desire to want to become Jewish. And Chazal tell us that the steps that Orpah took in that direction as she accompanied Naomi with her initial desire, she got rewarded for. It wasn't fake, it was genuine. So what's the difference between them? The difference is that Orpah wanted it. But Rus really wanted it. Orpah had a level of desire. She cried, she was emotionally taken in. She wanted to pursue it. But when it came to enough obstacles, it came to enough of a pushback, she went, okay, shkoyach, and get endict. And she walked off. But Rus pushed on. For Rus Dov Kabo. Rus pushed on. Because what Rus was driven by was a drive and a desire for spiritual kinyan, a drive and a desire to join this special people, to have what Naomi has. She saw something special that she lived by. She wanted that as well. She wanted it with such a strong desire, she pushed till the end. We lein Rus on Shovuos because of the lesson, as the Yalkut Shmoni says, that it carries for us. We want to grow. We want to become great in spiritual on our level. We want to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But there's always trials and tribulations of life, both generally in life, but also specifically. How many times, countless of times, and I can speak for myself, have we had an idea of a certain type of limud we wanted to do, a certain chazorah program we wanted to join, a certain chavrusa we wanted to make, and we did it a couple of times, and then it petered out. Why do such things peter out? Because that's the nature of life. We get into things and we move away from things, and we ebb and flow, and that's kind of how life works. But that's where the growth points are. Torah is only given by Yisurim doesn't mean that you have to walk around with someone whipping you on your back and making sure you suffer. It means that life is full of challenges. We know that. It's not a chiddush, but that's where the growth point is. Lein Rus, look at Rus, and be inspired from Rus. Realize that if you want to get through, you need a clarity of purpose. You need to know what you're after, and you need to chase it like Rus chased Yiddishkeit. Like Rus looked past all her obstacles for Rus Dov Gabo. You cling to that with all your might, and yes, you'll fall, and yes, you'll try, and you'll fail, but you back up again, and you're back up again, because you're after your mission with clarity and with resolve. That's the first reason that we expounded upon as to why Rus is laid on Shovuos, for this, to deliver this message. The second reason I want to expound on is the reason of Torah being chesed. So, again, it's a Yalkut Shmoni, a different remez, but Yalkut Shmoni says, Omar Rav Zeira commented of the following about Megillas Rus. He said, look, Megillah Azu, ein ba, loy tuma, loy tara, loy heta, v'loy issa. There's no halachas that are majorly relevant from this Megillah. Brackets, there are those that ask on this, that we do learn Hilchas Chalitza from the story of Boaz. There's a good kasha. But leaving that to the side, Yalkut Shmoni says, there are no halachas in Megillas Rus. V'lama nichtava. So why would such a story be written? We're not in the business of telling stories for the sake of telling stories. Says the Yalkut Shmoni, lelamedcha schar shal goim lechasodim, to teach us the reward of those who engage in chesed. And the two chasodim that the Yalkut mentions, although there's a lot of different stories of chesed within the Megillah of Rus, but the two that Yalkut mentions is the fact, it's very interesting, the fact that Rus and Orpah, in brackets, engaged in looking after. So after the husband's petira, after the husband's benifta, they were engaged in looking after their tachrichim and basically ensuring that they had a proper burial. You have to remember that their family was completely isolated wherever they lived in Mayov. There wasn't a Jewish killer there, it sounds like, right? They'd run away from the killer, that's the point. So it was really left down to themselves to sort it all out. They, being the new daughters-in-law of the family, could have said, see ya, and walked off. But they didn't. They contributed and they helped in this specific way. And their second factor that the Yalkut Shmoni brings out is that they were mevater on their ksuba. Very, very interesting. Again, they come in to a rich, wealthy family. I'm pretty sure they were offered the world in their ksuba. Okay, if they weren't Jewish and whatever marital contract there was, okay, but there was some form of contract, of course. And they could have turned around to Naomi and say, come on. Yeah, cough up. And not only did they not do that, they went out of their way to be kind to Naomi. Those are the two things that the Yalkut Shmoni points to teach us how great and how important Gemilas Chesed is. And when we talk about the schar obviously is that Rus became, as I mentioned, the grandmother of David HaMelech. What could be greater than Eima Malchus, to be the mother of the Malchus and the mother of Mashiach to come? So what the Yalkut Shmoni is saying, and others say it in slightly similar fashion, maybe different ways, but they all point to the same thing, that chesed is the fundamental Jewish value. It sits at the heart of Torah. And the Gemara in Sotah Yudalad Amadav tells us, Darashav Simlai, Torah tchilosa gemilas chasadim, v'seifek gemilas chasadim. The Torah begins with chesed, Hashem providing clothes for Adam and Chava. It ends with chesed, of Hashem burying Moshe Rabbeinu. Torah is full of chesed. And in case you weren't yet clear, the Marshal on that Gemara says, who Hayrah is normally a lashon that we use on halacha. This is a directive. But Mailas HaTorah, Ki haTorah kula meirosha v'atzoifa kula chesed. Says the Maharsha, Torah is chesed, synonymous with chesed. Torah is built on chesed. The framework for Torah is the framework of chesed. Rabbeinu Yonah writes in Ovis, Gimel Yud Zayin, on the mission of Im Ein Derech Eretz Ein Torah. What does it mean that there's no Derech Eretz, there's no Torah? Says the Rabbeinu Yonah, you need to be masakin your midas before you get into Torah. Because if you want Torah to be shoichen, to rest on a person, it's not going to rest on a person she'enoi bal midas tovus. This framework for growth in Torah is the framework of chesed, midas tovus. So, Shovuos, the day of Kabolas Hatorah, the day when we are being mechadish ourselves in our connection to Torah, our commitment to Torah, our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as we spoke last week, it's a Rosh Hashanah for our spirituality overall. Of course, this is a day when we want to be reminded of the priority, we want to be reminded of the values of Torah. And the value of Torah that sits at the heart of Torah is Torah's chesed. It has to be the case that we're focused on midas tovus, growth of midas and growth of chesed. As we see from the Rabbeinu Yonah, we want Torah to rest on us. We want spiritual growth. We want to be able to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not going to rest on someone who doesn't have midas tovus. So that's the second reason given as to why Rus is lein on Shovuos. Now we come to the third one, which will be the last one for tonight, but it's very interesting. So I said that it's brought down that there's somehow a connection between Rus and Chizuk and Bitochen, and specifically as it pertains to Mashiach. So I spent quite a bit of time researching this because aside from the person I'm going to quote in a second, I couldn't find anyone else who says this idea. And I wasn't even able to, due to limited access, I wasn't able to check up the source of this very fact. So I'm going by someone else saying it, quoting in his name, which I don't like to do, but I'm just being honest, that's where it is, and I assume it's authentic. So I saw it brought down from the Matei Moshe, Simon Tofrei Sadi Gimel, who brings from Reb David Abin Yechaya. Reb David Abin Yechaya, I did a bit of research, was a Spanish Dayan. He lived in the 15th century and he wrote Sforim. Choshev dude, right? Choshev Talmud Chacham. And he writes, the reason why we're noyeg to lein Megillas Rus on Shovuos, lintoya b'nafshoseinu midas habitochen, in order to implant in our souls the midah of bitochen. And he makes the connection in the same way that Hashem promised at the end of Mitzrayim to bring us out of Mitzrayim, and his promise became fulfilled. Similarly, Hashem made a promise to bring us out of the current Golos, the promise will be fulfilled. So he connects that idea. And I'll tell you why I find this interesting, and B'ez Hashem, why we can expand on this a little bit. Because many people, and I mentioned this separately, but many bring down the reason why we lein Rus on Shovuos is because it was David HaMelech's Yortzeit. Now some do question respectfully this idea. I mean, it's a lovely tribute to David HaMelech to read Rus because it's his grandmother on the day of his Yortzeit. But we don't do things in Klal Yisrael just for tribute's sake. There's going to be a level of meaning, a level of connection, something that's relevant to us. And through the Matei Moshe, I think there's a lesson here that we can connect to in a way that makes it kind of more than just a tribute to David HaMelech. There's something fundamental in Yesodistic here. And it goes like this. We've spoken tonight about Rus. We've said Rus in terms of her resilience, in terms of her willingness and a desire to pursue Torah, even though there was obstacles. We said Rus, the Balas Chesed. But there's something else about Rus. Rus had incredible positivity and hope. In the face of terrible circumstances, Rus held on to hope. Think about the end of the story of Rus. Rus goes ahead through Chalitza and all the whole business of Boaz and Ovis, and she goes and ends up marrying Boaz. Boaz is 20, 30 years her senior. Do you think for a second that she married Boaz for any other reason other than the fact that she knew she was doing the right thing? That's what Rus did, and she conducted herself in that way. She lived her life trying to do the right thing. The Yalkut Shmoni tells us what's famous, that the next day after they married, Boaz died. Now imagine what Rus felt like. What a rubbish life. She married into a rich family. Everything fell apart there. She married into riches, although there's no money left. She lost the first husband. Years go by and all the rest of it, and fine, she marries the second one. At least he's a tzaddik, he's a big guy. It's a choshev shidduch at least on some level. The next day he dies. I've lost my second husband now. Do you know that we don't find a single word of negativity from Rus? In fact, the Psukim end, the Megillah's Rus end very soon after the Psukim that detail. She married Boaz, they had a child. The people were celebrating that Naomi was participating in this. It was called a nachas for Naomi, that she had a grandchild. It's very nice. Moves straight into the genealogy, and David HaMelech comes at the end of that. I think, aside from the other things we pointed out about Rus, I think this is incredibly powerful. That Rus's attitude in her life was to ignore and look past the difficulties that she had, and to live with hope and positivity and bitochen in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no other way of explaining this. There's no other way of explaining how Rus could have so much not geschmack in her life, to put it lightly, and for her to be fine with it. When is a person fine with difficulties in their life? When they are bali bitochen. To me, that's the obvious implication of the story. So yes, on Shovuos, where we makabel the Torah, and as we said, we want to connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want to renew our commitment anew. This is very appropriate that on this day we remember a story of how someone clear-eyed as Rus pursued Torah in spite of difficulties, and what fueled her ability to push through the difficulties was the fact that she had strong bitochen, the fact that she held on to hope, the fact that she looked past her current difficulties and she was able to see everything to the best, and it will be for the best. And Taka, at the end of generations, it was for the best. She was the mother of Imam Malchus of David HaMelech. So in summary, we've spoken through 3 different reasons why we lein Rus, and I think each of them carries a powerful limud. First of all, we said Torah is acquired with Yisurim. We said that Rus's clarity of purpose and ability to see past the difficulties and to really desire what she wanted in terms of becoming Jewish, that enabled her to go forward, and that's what we connect to on Shovuos by reading Rus. The second thing we said is Torah's chesed, the framework for spiritual growth of Torah, the framework for Torah and coming into pulsating through our veins and making us better people is going to be how much a person works on themselves with Midas Tovos and with chesed. And we see that Maila of chesed from Rus, and we see the schar of chesed from Rus, how she put herself out there for other people, and she was zeicha to such a gewaldige schar. And the final point we said was that Rus was unique in her strength and in her resilience, but most importantly in her hope, that she was happy and proud and fine to do the right thing in the moment, because she had bitochen. At her core of her conduct was not thinking too much into the difficulties, not allowing the challenges to get to her, but just to keep with the clarity that HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows best, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a plan, and it was that fueled her ability to get through her difficulty. And that is something we want to recognize, particularly on Shovuos, as we're makabel the Torah, to have that attitude and that midah and that pursuit of bitochen in our lives. And it's Hashem which we zeicha to the final geula of Mashiach Zidkenu B'Karov.